2024 has certainly been a surprise in the world of gaming for me. I've played a couple games that I expected to be okay that have ended up being awful, while also getting to play a couple games where my expectations were, let's just say in simplest terms, a little lower than others that ended up being okay, were honestly great experiences. We've had tons of games released this year that have been surprise successes like Helldivers 2, while also seeing well-known developers like BioWare kind of fizzle out and betray what their games are known for. I mean, at the end of the day, there are hundreds of games released in a calendar year, and it's pretty hard to keep up with all of them, but there is one that seemed to pique my interest in the worst type of way: Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I was a hater when it was first announced. I mean, let's be honest here, Bethesda hasn't felt like itself lately since its acquisition by Microsoft, and the concept seemed too bold to succeed. I mean, let's be real here, it's been a rough generation for the Xbox brand as a whole. I would even go as far as to say that they are last in the current console generation in general, but I mean, hey, they are worth billions and I'm just a faceless YouTuber. What their numbers say mean nothing to me at the end of it, and I am honestly hoping that they kind of return to their roots with some of their standout games. But here's the thing, if you clicked on this video, first off, thanks for being here, and you are not here to talk about the console warring. Sure, that would boost my engagement, but that argument has been dead for nearly a decade now, and honestly, we all know PC is the way to go. I know, I'll stop. Back to Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I'm going to blow some socks off here and piss off a lot of fanboys that kind of assumed this game was going to die, but here's the thing. This game is actually pretty good. I mean, right off the bat, you are thrown into probably one of the most iconic scenes in cinema. Raiders of the Lost Ark was really the only movie out of the series that I distinctly remember, and this game's intro is the same as the movie. Everything looks nearly identical, and the characters are way closer to looking real than I thought my potato of a PC could handle. And I mean, you really do get the feeling that this is an Indiana Jones game almost immediately. It doesn't try to sell you some BS about how it's a ripoff of Uncharted, or trying to be something it's not. From minute one all the way to the end, this game's identity is so clear and put on display so nicely that I can't help but commend the developers for making something that feels so authentic to the source material. Once you're past the initial introduction, the story hones in on another great adventure that Indy has seemingly found himself in. The namesake title, The Great Circle, is a world-spanning quest that has Indiana traveling from the holy streets of the Vatican, to the arid deserts and the ancient pyramids of Egypt, to the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas, the lush rainforests of Siam, and even Iraq. I'm not even going to lie, when the game started in the Vatican, I had no idea that the story was going to span as many continents as it did. This is, of course, the strongest aspect of the game, as your story feels like it has world-ending consequences if you fail, and I mean it feels right at home with the classic Indiana Jones movies. I would even go so far as to say this game's story can stand up with the titans of the classics and dwarfs anything that has been released by the series since those original movies. That statement in itself should be more than enough to pique the interest of any fan of the series, and I think that is where it's targeted. Everything feels so authentic and made with care, and I can't say anything besides the whole game is a wild ride from the beginning to the end. I will say that I ran into a potentially game-breaking bug towards the end of the third act while I was in Siam, so I mean, that was weird to experience as it really didn't allow me to go any farther forward. But from a review perspective, I can still feel confident the story will end on a high note. Even if the story ended right where I was stuck, I can still say I was more than pleased with what I got so far. And the thing is, you're getting sucked into all these different situations on different continents. The game looks amazing. I ran this game on low for most of my settings as my CPU is kind of dated, but everything from the facial models to the trees swaying in the wind all looked as if they had been crafted with care. I will say it helps for the most part that the areas you're in are mostly small, so that helps with the feeling of scale. But I mean, that's not a negative point at all. Most games try to create that fake sense of open worldness are the ones that kind of fall flat in their execution. Every area feels unique, and there's just enough side quests and activities that keep you entertained as you take a break from the main story. Most side quests earn you adventure points, which is essentially what you use to level up your skills from the skill books you find. And money that you find can be used to buy items needed for some of the main quests, such as a lighter or a breather for underwater sections. I didn't dip my toes too much into the side quests, but I mean, they're there for those that need them and kind of want to get deeper into the story. I will say that the non-hostile NPCs feel a little mannequin-like in this game, and even the enemies feel kind of derpy, just in the way they react to your actions. But I mean, at the end of the day, those who you interact with as enemies and allies seem to function on a relatively normal level as far as interactions. Who knows, maybe they just see you beating up a Nazi and don't want to snitch. I'm not going to judge. I would do the same thing. just out here minding my business.
Father Christians over us.
Now, from a gameplay perspective, I think some people will be thrown off by the first-person camera choice over it being like a standard third-person kind of action adventure RPG. Like, I mean, pretty much what Uncharted is what I'm saying. I mean, I think it harps back to the idea that people were saying that this was gonna be an Uncharted ripoff with the Indiana Jones name plastered on top. I mean, and I will say the gameplay feels weird sometimes. It seems like it's mostly a stealth game on one hand, but on the same note, half of the fun I had was whipping people with my revolver or using the various guns that the fascist and Nazi enemies drop. I mean, obviously, Indy always carries his trusty revolver and his whip on his person, so those two staple items from the movies are here. And you could honestly run those two strictly and you would probably be fine, but on the same note, they don't feel as effective as I thought they would be. Most of the weapons you'll be using most often are the dozens of random items scattered around each area. I'm talking about everything from sledgehammers to wrenches to wine bottles, even pickaxes and other items that definitely seem super violent when you watch the stealth kills. Then you have the standard mix of guns from this era. So you have the Kar-98s to the shotguns, machine guns. I mean, the gunplay surprised me for how good it felt. But at the same time, sometimes it felt like your bullets did nothing, which is weird because you get one shot by some of the later enemies that have rifles and shotguns. Like, you stand no chance. This kind of leads me into thinking personally that the preferred method of beating the piss out of fascists is melee combat, which feels fine for what it is. I mean, punches feel hard-hitting, and the block system is sufficient for what the game needs. The plentiful mix of things you can use as weapons, paired with the fact that any gun can be switched to a melee mode with the press of a button, really does make it so the actual shooting of the guns is really, it feels like a last option. Albeit one that you can use if you're so inclined to do so. I had more than a few times where I was kind of tired of being sneaky and like, because the enemy AI is kind of derpy and just opted to go the gun-ho route. I mean, it all feels fine. Even the first-person perspective is kind of jarring. Even if the first-person perspective is kind of jarring to play sometimes. I mean, overall, it's okay. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I feel like the combat mostly takes a backseat to the Indiana Jones part of the game. The puzzles. This is where we get into the meat of the game itself, I think. I mean, I think at least. Sure, you have the option to beat up as many fascists as you want, and you can throw hands with every guard you see, and it doesn't matter. But what makes this game feel like an Indiana Jones game is the puzzles. I'm not talking insanely difficult puzzles by any means, but there are more than enough to keep an indie fan happy. Almost every little codex I had to solve to open a locked office, or ancient maze I had to escape was a challenge that felt right at home with the movies. Most of them can be summarized as turn this dial until something opens, or move these items until the pattern is complete, but that isn't to say that it's bad. Like I stated earlier, it all seems to feel authentic more than anything. Which, I mean, of course, if that's what we're going for, that's perfect. Nothing feels forced, and most of the puzzles are there so you can progress through the story of the Great Circle, as opposed to feeling like an added challenge just cuz. Well, my script is long enough, so let's wrap this one up as quickly, yeah, not as quickly, but as efficiently as possible. So, all in all, when you bring all this together and you get a cohesive experience, I have to say Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a win for Microsoft that they desperately needed. I mean, at the end of the day, the game does more than enough to satisfy the needs of any Indiana Jones fan. And I think it encourages, kind of newer people. Like me, myself, I wasn't born in the time when these movies came out. I didn't get to see them when they originally came out. But I feel like this is a great way to introduce the IP to, the next generation. And honestly, I see a sequel sometime in the near future. Because at this point, they can do anything. They can always pick between the movies. They can always do the times where it's kind of like that unknown little time between each movie. So the story is a great indie adventure, and when it's paired with the gorgeous locales you find yourself in, it really does paint one of the best experiences of this series in a long time. And I'm just talking about movies, of course, as well. Any fan of Indiana Jones will love every aspect of the story, from the funny one-liners to the general goofiness of the world itself, and honestly, adventure fans as a whole will probably love it as if they can get past the awkwardness of the combat sometimes, and honestly, the raw stupidity that the AI is. I'm talking about they have a range of motion of about, not range of motion, but view and range of motion, I guess, of about 10 degrees. Oh, and did I mention it's on Game Pass Ultimate? I mean, free is free, baby, and I love everything that's free. I can wholeheartedly recommend this to any fans of the Indiana Jones series as a whole, and honestly, anybody who's an action-adventure driven, kind of action-adventure narrative-driven game. It's not really a combat experience for the most part. It's mostly like an Indiana Jones experience. I was honestly pleasantly surprised, and I imagine you will be too if you play it. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope y'all have a good rest of your day.
This was made during the reign of the Hutmos IV, 1,000 years after Khufu.
Hello, little darling.
Ah!
Oh, look, Dr. Jones. He's quite sweet, really.
More of a